into something new. And you should all have a note on your screen that we are recording. And Michaela, can I have you slip to the next slide? So I thought just real quick, want to give you some housekeeping and let us know what's on the agenda for tonight. So right now we're in that welcome and introduction time, letting you know who's here and inviting you into this space with us. Then we're going to have a presentation and see some design scenarios that were created by our class. And then we're going to spend the last 45 to 50 minutes in an open and lively discussion, responding to those scenarios we saw and also just dreaming together and thinking together. A couple housekeeping items for this evening. If you're having any tech trouble and might need some assistance or help, you can message Julie Malnick. Her name is in the participant list and you can see it here. If you look for Julie, she will try to help you throughout with anything you need. We are recording this session. I feel like that's my other big tech housekeeping. You got a little message of that when you joined right now or when we started the recording. We're willing to cut off the community dialogue. If we get objections for people having themselves recorded, we'll cut that out, but we definitely want to share the scenario and the presentation portion after the event. If you would object to us recording you, if you could send a message to Julie using the chat during the event, or you could also email me to let me know if that would be a problem for you for any reason. And thanks, I see folks are still dropping their information in the chat of loving Calumet Park, of loving Luray Gardens. And we've got friends from all over the country. I'm seeing Arkansas here as one of the communities people are from. So we're really happy to have a really great group with us this evening. And I think with that, I would like to turn it over to our special guests, and I'll invite them to introduce themselves. And I'll first invite Professor Ron Henderson to get us started and to share about himself and the program. Michaela, you can turn off the screen, the slideshow for a moment.
Hi, I'm Ron Henderson, Professor and Director of the Landscape Architecture plus Urbanism program at Illinois Institute of Technology. We're the only landscape architecture program in the city of Chicago. And it's been a real honor to work with Friends of the Parks, last year we worked with the DuSable Park Coalition and the DuSable Heritage Foundation, working this year with friends on the southeast side for our program to engage the constituents in the city of Chicago in the design of public space. That's what we do as landscape architects. And that's what we do at Illinois Institute of Technology in our program, where we focus on public space, be it streets or parks. So it's a real honor to be invited again to work with Friends of the Park to advocate, design, and work with all of our energies for a robust and lively public realm in the city.
Great, thank you so much, Ron. We're just really excited to have this partnership and to be with you again. So I wanted to offer just an overview of why are we working on this Confined Disposal Facility Park vision and working with IIT on this. Well, first, many of you know the Friends of the Park's mission is to inspire, equip, and mobilize a diverse Chicago to ensure equity in our park system for a healthy Chicago. So that's our guiding light at all times. And in 2009, we released a plan and a vision called The Last 4 Miles. And actually, Michaela, can I ask you to open up the PowerPoint again at about the point where you stopped? Can you go to the next slide? And that Last 4 Miles vision was to connect our whole city with a continuous path of public parks. And we call it, Michaela, can you go to the next slide? And we worked between 2006 and 2009 with members all across the city to vision and create a community-based planning process that envisioned what those parks might be. And that led us to really identifying where there isn't public parks and how we might create those. And recently we had another Netsch lecture that talked about going through this whole plan kind of section by section. And one of those sections was the Confined Disposal Facility site. It is one of the last pieces on the south side that prevents us from having a contiguous parkland here in Chicago. It exists between Calumet Park and now Steelworkers Park, and kind of prevents this vision from becoming a reality and is a very crucial piece to us moving forward. Michaela, can I have you go to the next slide? And for those who haven't spent a lot of time with us looking at the last 4 miles, this just shows you that it refers to 2 miles on the north lakefront and 2 miles on the south lakefront where we don't currently have public parks. And you'll see here sort of part of that concept plan envisioning those areas as being parkland going forward. Next slide, Michaela. And so, as I said, today we're looking at that south portion and really that CDF facility. And this again shows you all the red areas on this map are where at the time in 2009, there were not parks. And you can see the CDF, if you look towards the bottom of the map, marked out as the place next to Calumet Park. Next slide, Michaela. And then this just shows you, this was the area in the plan of what we began envisioning of right next to Calumet Park, creating a much more expansive park back in 2009 and that work. Next slide, please. But this is what is there today. And I know our students will talk a lot more about it. But as I said, this is blocking our work of being able to create that contiguous path from Evanston to Indiana of public park. And it's an eyesore and a toxic dump. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers runs this site because they are dredging the Calumet River to make it more passable for boats. And they have determined that the sediment they are picking up is too toxic to go directly into the lake. And that is why they put it into the Confined Disposal Facility. That is an in-water facility sitting right at the Calumet River and on Lake Michigan. At Friends of the Parks, we have evidence to believe that this site is currently leaking some of its toxins into the water. And we know that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been operating the site there for 40 years. So it is an old facility created in the 80s when environmental policies and the visions for our communities were very different. But throughout the life of this facility, there have been multiple promises by members of the Illinois General Assembly, by the Chicago Park District, by the city, that this land would be transformed into a park once this facility was full. And it is believed right now that it is full, or at least inches, like just little bitty space left at the very top to be full. And the Army Corps came forward last year with its new proposal of what it would do with all this sediment, where it would go next. And they said, we would like to expand this site 25 feet in the air, not capping it, not turning it into a park, removing their promise, and removing this vital lakefront property from access of our community. So we don't agree with that here at Friends of the Parks, and so do many other groups like the Alliance for the Southeast, who's with us tonight, and many of you I know have been active in advocating to get this site shut down so that it can become a park, but also we can stop having a toxic dump on our river and on our lakeshore. There's no reason that should continue to operate there. It's already been there for 40 years. At present, they have a 1-year permit to keep operating while they're allowed to redo some of their studies and resubmit some of the permitting, the Army Corps, but we hope to stop them from being able to move forward with this vertical expansion. And that's part of the reason for this event tonight, is for us to vision about this together, to start living into the reality that this is going to be a park. We're going to fight for that. And we want to have some of our visions and our ideas ready. So thank you all so much for being here and for joining us. And I will hand this back over to our class from the Illinois Institute of Technology.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Let's go to the next slide, if we're ready to go for, there we go. Great. So I've been working with Amanda Soto and Daniel Garchek, students who just received their Bachelor of Architecture degrees at Illinois Institute of Technology, and have been admitted into our landscape architecture master's program. And they agreed to work with us this summer on this park. You'll be hearing from them and looking at some of their scenarios here soon. I'm going to go through a little bit of a history of the site. I also just want to say we use the word scenarios very carefully to represent what these ideas are, because they're kind of what ifs. So they're not final design proposals or anything like that. They are catalysts for us to have a lively discussion. A lively discussion about a place that doesn't have a name. What is the name of this? Are we going to call it CDF Park? Let's hope not. So among all of the things that we might want to envision, let's also kind of begin to imagine a way of expressing this place through a name. Next slide. First, the land. As landscape architects, we always start with the natural history. So here we go. Next slide. The Calumet River met Lake Michigan as a very slow moving water body meeting a very dynamic lake. Next slide. If you want to see something like those dynamic processes at work, go to Illinois Beach State Park. It's a remarkable example of a kind of languid river meeting the lake. The Chicago River, where it meets Lake Michigan, would have had a similar kind of it would have been a similar kind of landscape. The Calumet, of course, being significantly larger here than what's known as the Dead River at Illinois Beach State Park. But here, I think you can see the landscape. It's sandy, sedimenty. The water is very shallow, moves very slowly. A lot of Merriam grass, cottonwoods, and then deeper away from the lake, more robust deciduous forest, woodland. Next slide. The Calumet area is also distinguished by wet prairies, a whole variety of wetlands from bogs, panays, fens, and marshes, and of course the dunes. Next slide. So the future CDF kind of sits out in the lake in 1870. This is when, this is a year before the Chicago fire and when industrial development began on the river around the 1870s. By 1890, the Calumet River was heavily polluted already with the waste of steel and iron mills, foundries, meat packing, glue and cornstarch factories. Sounds wonderful. Next slide. One of the earliest photographs of the Calumet River from the 1870s. And you can see the work to change the land and the water is already well in process. Next slide. In 1886, the Iroquois Iron Company established itself on the south bank of the Calumet River. Next slide. And in 1913, Iroquois iron became Iroquois steel. Of course, this was a remarkable period on the south side of Chicago. Calumet Park had been built about 8 years before in 1905. Of course, this development at Iroquois steel coincided with the Cal-Sag Channel being built from 1911 to 1922. And of course, that's when the river was first dredged in 1912, was part of the Cal-Sag Channel construction. So this particular period of time in the early 19-teens really cemented the industrialization of this part of the Calumet River and the shoreline of Lake Michigan. Next slide. And in 1912, you can see some of the dredge booms and the beginning of the Calumet Iron Works. It's kind of a remarkable photograph. Next slide. And of course, as I said, in 1905, Calumet Park, designed by the Olmsted brothers, opened in 1905. But it continued to grow. The field house was a decade later, and it continued to expand into the 1930s. Next slide. From this same kind of period, we found Sanborn maps, which are a particular kind of insurance maps that gave us a lot of detail on the Iroquois Iron Works. So we have that information as well, and we've kind of assembled them into a map. Next slide. And so really it was, the Confined Disposal Facility began construction in 1982. And by 1994, the impounding dikes had all been constructed. The dike at the south end of the site that enclosed the dewatering pond was set. And you can see the expansion into the lake of the Combined Disposal Facility. And just as a reminder, much of Chicago's accessible lakefront parks are also built on landfill. This seems to be the way that we do it. Next slide. This is one of many dredge confined disposal facilities on the Great Lakes. Those in red, when this map was made a few years ago, they were, the ones in red were to be closed within 5 years. The ones in yellow, 5 to 10 years. And the green ones primarily from the St. Clair River, where Lake Erie and Lake Huron meet, down to Toledo were the ones that were primarily going to stay open. So, this is a site that has many other locations around the Great Lakes that may learn from what we're able to do here in Chicago. Next slide. On the left is the site in the 1940s. On the right in 1994, you can begin to see the CDF, but you also see the Southwark Steel Plant going away. So to the north of the site, an incredible transformation over the last, in that period of 50 years. Next slide. Looking south, the Calumet River in the foreground, the North American Stevedoring Company port of Chicago. And then in the white triangle boundary that you'll see repeatedly is the Combined Disposal Facility, Calumet Park, and then looking south to the Skyway. Next slide. So NASCO handles bulk materials historically. And among many infractions, there's been investigations by the Chicago Department of Health and the EPA on, among other contaminants, ferromanganese alloy dust. That is it's a really challenging particulate with significant health ramifications for people who ingest that dust. Next slide. This series of aerial photographs, I think, is really telling. In the upper left is 1998. So the dikes had just been installed and most of the CDF is water. The top center is I have to look closer, 2002. Dredge starts to fill in by 2004 in the upper right, more dredge, bottom left, more dredge. But beginning in 2015, which is the center bottom, you also see the transformation of the port from a bulk materials port to a container port, right? That transformation that happened in global trade. And by 2021, you can see in the dashed orange circle, what used to be a woodland is now container storage. So the woodland has been removed, and that is all now container storage, something that's really only happened within the last decade. Next slide. So when we look at the 2009 last 4 miles concept plan, we see that same orange dash circle with an anticipation that that woodland that existed prior to the expansion of the port as a container port might actually conjoin Calumet Park and make a larger contribution to public space. Next slide. But that is not available now. That's full of containers. So I think it's important for everyone to understand that the work of our students this summer is really openly looking at that wedge of the combined disposal facility. So this is a significant change from the ambition of the last 4 mile concept plan from 2009. Next slide. So this is our site, the combined disposal facility in this boundary of shown here in white. Next slide. So what is there? At the far north is this kind of almost isosceles triangle shape. That's the drying dredge pad, which is a beneficial use material. In the center of the CDF is the drying dredge pad with confined disposal. We are right on the Illinois-Indiana boundary, so there's probably jurisdictional limitations if we wanted, to build a boardwalk out, along the lake. We do know we have a kind of limit there before we would go into the jurisdiction of our neighboring state. To the south of the site is the dewatering pond, which would remain an open water pond. And then we have this very narrow kind of tethered connection to Calumet Park. Next slide, which I think will be one of the critical design questions. So how big is this? The shoreline along the Calumet River to the north is about 1,200 feet. Along Lake Michigan to the east, it's about 2,800 feet. That's about half a mile. Or if you were to walk from Calumet Park up to the point, that would be a 10 or 15-minute walk. And then to walk back would be the same. So it's a 20 or 30-minute walk along Lake Michigan's shoreline to get out to the point. Just to give you a sense of both scale and dimension, but also the time that it would take to walk. Next slide. And then we took this triangle and we scattered it across several places in the neighborhood. So the CDF is in orange. If you took that same shape and overlaid it at Steelworkers Park, it would go all the way from the Calumet River to the north bank of the North Slip. So those of you who know Steelworkers Park can begin to imagine what it takes to walk through the meadow at Steelworkers Park. This is 2 to 3 times that size. If you're familiar with Calumet Park, the triangle covers the beach, the field house, the Coast Guard station, and goes up along the edge of the playing fields. And then as a scale more embedded in the neighborhood, it would encompass Jesse Owens Park and the Chicago Vocational High School, just so you got a sense of the scale of the CDF. Next slide. Next slide. I'd like to introduce Amanda Soto. And Amanda, if you could also do a little bit of an introduction to yourself. Amanda's going to share a little bit more of the research we've done. And I'm turning it over to Amanda and Daniel now to go through some of their research, and then they will share some of their scenarios.
Thank you, Professor Henderson. Hello, my name is Amanda Soto. I'm from Niles, Illinois, and as Professor Henderson has said, I just graduated with my bachelor's in architecture from IIT, and I joined the Master's of Landscape Architecture this summer. I'm definitely really interested in bringing back native ecosystems into new developments around the city. So this is perfect. So I will be first continuing on with demographics of the area. Next slide. So to bring us down to the neighborhood scale, we have a land use map depicting residential, commercial, parks, planned developments, and different industrial zones. As you can see, there are quite a few large parcels of land along the river that are considered industrial. Next slide. Large pockets of these industrial zones have been selected in recent years to be part of an industrial growth zone that's attempting to revitalize the remaining industry that remains there. Next slide. Public transportation in the area is pretty broken up, and it starts to begin to break from the traditional Chicago grid system. Bike lanes seem to lead to dead ends, although the one along the river remains continuous. Next slide. And then here's an overlay of the transportation with the different land use, the land use map. And as you can see, most of those breaks in transportation occur right at industrial zones, and it really depicts how these industrial zones are not always benefiting the community and positive output. Next slide. So within the neighborhood of East Side, most of the population is Latino, and there's a pretty even distribution of ages spanning from 1 to 64. It's pretty evenly distributed, and is not something that you see in every neighborhood across the city. Next slide. Next slide. So now I will discuss some of the materials that we've seen on the site visit we took to see the area. Next slide. So during our site visit, we scooped up a handful of sand from Calumet Park, and we found massive amounts of invasive mussels and glacier rock, sea glass, and of course, industrial slag. Next slide. So slag is the byproduct of converting iron to steel, and two main ways is that it's done is through basic oxygen furnaces and electric arc furnaces. Both of these types of methods were used by Iroquois Steel and US Steel, and they still continue to remain on the site after all these years after they've been discontinued. Next slide. So now I will pass this on to my fellow classmate, Daniel.
Hello, my name is Daniel Garchek, and I am from the southwest suburbs of Chicago called Lamont. And I've also graduated in the spring with my bachelor's in architecture, and I'm currently enrolled in the master's of landscape architecture with Ron and Amanda. And then one of the earlier stages of after our site visit was kind of looking at different precedents. And we looked at 4 native ecosystems, 4 nature intensive parks, and 4 human intensive parks. Next slide. So Pinhog Bog is located in La Porte, Indiana, and Great Marsh. They both provide a lot of different diversity and ecology that wouldn't be seen elsewhere. And then the Orland grassland is located in a suburb of Tinley Park. And these provide a lot of different diversities with the ecology. Next slide. And then here are 4 nature intensive parks: Olympia Fields Park, Northerly Island, which both of these play around with different topography and how they shape the land. And then just north of our site of Calumet Park is Steelworkers Park, which was used. It was just turned into a park, and it also contains dredge, which was infilled, which is below what is a prairie grassland park as well. And then West H Schelt, which is a kind of a design which they ironed out sand spots and covered them with seashells or just other shells. And this design is ideal resting place for black and white coastal birds, which seek to camouflage the landscape at high tide. Next slide. We will have human intensive parks. So these allow for more kind of occupant-based levels. So we have Milton Lee Olive Park, Philadelphia Navy Yard, Lincoln Park Nature Center, and Paul Bisano Park. These provide a lot more kind of interactive uses. Next slide. Next. And then here are the beginning of my 3 scenarios. Next slide. So my first design is called Ecology Loops. So this design brings the most diversity to our park with 4 different ecosystems, which include a thicket for birds, a prairie, a grass field, and a wetland. And then the circulation is in the form of circles with different ecosystems piercing through it. So you could kind of see on the right with my concept sketch and how it turned into the design. So when you enter the park, the visitor walks over a boardwalk over the dewatering pond, and then arrives at the four circular paths. If you go to the next slide, you can see just 4 different sections, how the circulation and the path provides the specific design allows for visitors to have different experiences walking through the path. So you could walk through the thicket, the prairie, the grass field, or a wetland, and it'll give you a different experience each time, no matter which way you're going through in the park. And then the next slide, you could see an aerial design view of how the different ecosystems would be working together, and how the different circles are kind of calculated out into different paths. So the smaller one would be a 1/4 mile, and then the last 3 would be a 1 mile sum. So the total distance would be 1.5 miles with the boardwalk as you enter the park. And the whole idea of our park being so kind of secluded, the only way a visitor would want to go to the park is because they actually want to like walk. So all 3 of my designs, they kind of evolve around experiencing the whole park and allowing the visitor to walk through the entire site. So on the next slide is going to be my second scenario, which would be kind of more of a medium intensity. And this design provides a narrow trail-like path throughout the playful topography, which consists of wetland, prairie, and grass field. So with this design, I played a lot with the different elevations and topography and how the path would circulate around the whole site. Primarily just around a prairie field. And visitors enter the park walking over the dewatering pond as well. And then there are 2 like edges along the water where they could be kind of brought to and kind of celebrated when you make the kind of like a reward after you make the path, the trail. And then just center of the park would be the highest point, which could be used as a sledding hill during the winter. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see how the different topography would be used. And then the cross hatching is the current dredge infill. And then on top, which would just be the kind of the diagonal hatching would be the new material that would be used to cap the site and then bring the elevations up. And then onto the next slide is the aerial view, kind of showing the main focal point would be the grass field hill, which could be used to look at the different views of Chicago and the water, because that's one of the nice things of our site. You could see a little bit of the skyline, and then you could see how you would be able to enter over the dewatering pond. And then my third design on the next slide is a low intensity design, which has an active edge. So with this design, it creates a larger space for birds by having the most of the site dedicated to a large thicket. And then you push the occupant's path along the water. So you kind of play around with the edge, you're in and out. You walk into the site, so you're pulled away from the water, and you're over the dewatering pond. You get brought to the over the lake, and then you get brought back into the thicket, and then you arrive at the leisure pad, which is gives the best view of the site while providing endless opportunities for use over the water, which would create a nice environment. And then you could loop back to more of like a just straightforward path with different resting spots next to it. So on the next slide, you could see the section where it would mostly just be a large thicket. So this would be the less, with the less use, the low intensity idea. And then you would still have the interaction with the water. And then on the next slide, you could see the aerial of how the circulation path moves. It's very simple, and it just extends the edge of the lake. So it doesn't just end abruptly, and it creates kind of like a loop for bikers or joggers or anybody just on a walk. And that concludes my three scenarios. So we can move on back to Amanda.
Hello again. So here are my three scenarios. Next slide. So for my first scenario, Calumet Dunes is a proposal designed for high density foot traffic programming with the combination of using native ecosystems to manage that density. Next slide. The park has three main ecosystems that carry different programming. To the north of the site is the dunes area that can handle heavy foot traffic brought over by the event venue. The venue can host a variety of programming like concerts, private events, and when it's not in use, it can serve as an overlook. The marsh area serve as a winding, calm walking path that is quieter than the main paths, and the prairie hosts more active programming such as volleyball and a mini golf course, along with picnic areas. Next slide. This is the section, on this section, we're going to focus more on the dunes ecosystem and its construction. So with my interest in slag, I've been trying to incorporate slag into all three of my iterations in different ways. And with this iteration, we are using that slag to help build up the highest points on the dunes. And so that will allow us to import less topsoil, and you're reusing that material that is left all over the community. And then here below is just a variety of native ecology that would be included in this part of the site. And next slide. So then for my second scenario, we focus on the preservation of native habitats for shorebirds and pollinators, while also trying to maintain a medium volume of human traffic through the site. Next slide. To the north is shorebird swamp that maximizes the amount of nesting area for birds such as the pippin plover. To the south is the pollination prairie where seeds are dispersed by the wind over the site, where shallow damp channels collect those seeds and allow them to germinate and grow and continue to spread. Along the lakeside is the boardwalk, which includes more of the heavier programming such as basketball courts, picnic areas, sculpture garden, and exploration area for kids to learn more about the native environment that they will see on the site. Next slide. So here we're focusing on shorebird swamp, where the public has access to see these endangered birds nesting in their native habitat. For this scenario, I use slag as erosion control along the water side, and that the birds can also use that as a type of camouflage depending on the species. Along with the native ecology, you're going to have similar to the last scenario, you're going to have a lot of cottonwood, but you're also going to have ecology that's more suited for more water holding landscapes. Next slide. So for this park design, I wanted to focus on a landscape that would evolve over the years and would serve as low foot traffic. One such ecosystem is a bog that is not the most common landscape in our area, but it should be brought up more. So next slide. During the planting stage of this design, we would import peat moss and sphagnum moss that will be used as a form of a base for the bog, and a stagnant lake will be formed in the middle of the site. An educational area and research center will welcome the community and schools to see the process of what's going to go into actually constructing a bog and seeing that evolve over time. Next slide. After 20 years, we can expect to see that stagnant lake shrink as plant matter begins to build up. A boardwalk along the lake will also be added that will go all the way up to the north corner, so we can actually access the bog, but not to its full entirety. Next slide. After 100 years, the bog should be settled enough that we can be able to extend a walkway to the center of the bog. And at this point, that lake will be almost non-existent, and it will continue to rise in elevation. Next slide. So for this design, bogs are known to be very acidic, and studies have shown that slag collected in the Chicago and Gary area actually neutralize slag and neutralize acidic environments. So by introducing slag, you can control how much acidity is present in one part of the site versus another. So you can control where different plantings occur a bit more than just letting it form how it usually would. And then the type of ecology you would see within this type of ecosystem is quite unique. You'll have a lot of sundews and pitcher plants along with different ferns and irises and tamarack and aspen. Next slide. Yeah, and that concludes our investigation of our scenarios and the site. So thank you.
Thank you all. I think we can stop sharing the screen if we're done with that. And there was one question I think that came in. This is really interesting. Thank you so much for this. Julie, do you want to tell us what our question was about the presentation?
Yes. So there was two. There was one where it was, if they wanted to know if we had time, if we could hear more about the effects of the leaking, and then also the one regarding the presentations, where what is the view when you look west from the park.
And I think that question about looking west was for you, Daniel, from one of your options. You're talking about getting city views, but then wondering what would you see to the west?
So to the west is kind of like an industrial port. So there's just more storage, so that you would kind of want to block that with kind of with vegetation. But looking north, you would see the view of the skyline.
Yeah, hi, it's Ron. I think also if you look west, you would see shipping containers, but you would also see a couple of the bridges. If you got up high enough, you might even see the bridge there at Calumet Fisheries. So, I mean, it's clearly an industrial panorama to the west. To the north, Steelworkers Park and glimpses of the city skyline. To the south, Calumet Park, and then of course to the east, to the horizon of the lake, and the kind of arc at the southern end of Lake Michigan. So yeah, you can see Indiana.
And before we jump, I know there was a question about worries about the leakage from the CDF. And what I can say is we know that there is mercury and lead and PCBs potentially, well, we know that is in the sediment. And so I think the concern is any of those materials are hazardous for our health. So it's a question of how much might be leaking out, which is some research that I know Friends of the Parks has been trying to talk with different scientists to help us test the water quality, because of course the Calumet River is right next, it could be going into the river, but also into the lake, which is the source of our drinking water. So thank you so much. So we could do a whole other presentation, I think, on those risks, but I think we can all tell that that is of course a risk to us to have that site leak.
There's another question in the chat that says, how did your demographic findings influence the types of parks outlined in your scenarios?
Amanda, do you want to field that one?
Yeah, for me, what really stuck out to me was the variety of ages that exist within the community. So trying to put in programming that would benefit kids to teens to adults is what I really try to focus on, to have that variety, having that variety actually present on most of my scenarios was one of the influences I had from that information.
So hi, it's Ron. You know, I think this is always one of the most critical questions that any of us who are involved in public space kind of wrestle with, which is how do we embody the aspirations of those in the neighborhood, those who we hope will be using the park on a daily basis or weekly basis. So the demographic study was, you know, fairly straightforward, but it's remote. You know, it's kind of a remote idea. I think what's really going to be valuable for us is hearing from people this evening, and you know, and continuing in the process to understand things that don't show up in a GIS inventory of telling us what the neighborhood is about, right?
And I know we want to get to our discussion, but I see some more hands for questions. So I was going to invite Robert to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, how's it going? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. First, you know, I'm a lifelong resident, and I want to thank the students for their wonderful work, both on the presentations. I mean, it was really great to see. Now, while overall the presentations were nice, I do have a few concerns about these proposals, specifically on potential contributions to gentrification, cost of living increases, distributions of resources, and security. So, before I kind of go on, just a bit of context. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the city came to us with plans to transform the USX site for recreation and housing. But after battles with community residents and union workers, sometime in the early 2000s, the city promised to keep the southern portion of the USX site and near the river industrial. They promised us blue-collar jobs and opportunities. In the early 2010s, the city reneged on their promise and returned to plans for housing and lake/river amenities with the McCaffrey Lakeside proposal. Many of us fought against it and won our victory, but the city still denied proposals for blue-collar jobs on the site. With unemployment remaining near 60% and close to 70% of residents making below the $50,000 area median income salary the city is setting for area affordable housing, rising inflationary costs is already presenting huge burdens for residents. Given that increases in park space contribute to higher cost of living, I'm very concerned about the allocation of resources in our community and their impacts. For instance, a recent news article came out about the lack of security and crimes at Chicago parks. Among the parks mentioned in the article was Calumet Park. For the past 2 years, it seems as if Cal has been seeing disinvestment with rundown facilities, garbage, beach, and infrastructure decay, among others. The crime has never really gotten any better either. It seems like expanding Cal and these other parks will only take additional resources away from the existing community and doesn't seem to be helping with our existing security issues. Already, since the addition of Steelworkers Park, officers have to travel and patrol additional areas, yet the police beat boundaries remain the same with no new officers added. So given all that, I'm not really sure how I feel about this. How will you ensure that these developments will not contribute to ongoing gentrification efforts, present additional cost of living burdens on the surrounding community, ensure resources are not taken away from the existing community, the things that the existing community actually use, and ensure that security resources are not further overcommitted? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert, for bringing, I think those are really important points as we think of any of our expansion of the last 4 miles park system in the city, because the last thing I think Friends of the Parks wants to be promoting is that concern of gentrification. And right, whenever there's new development, there is a risk, and we really have to involve our communities and plan strategically and look at communities that have already experienced this, right? So we need to go to places to learn both positive examples and negative examples and try to figure out how we head this off at the pass and organize around it before it happens. So it's not a clear answer, but it's a process, right? We need to be organizing together and working towards this collectively. And I would say, I might also say, you mentioned specifically about resources. How do we be sure Calumet Park doesn't make sure it gets the security needs it needs and also its own investment? And I think that continues to be something that we want to advocate for, right? Is that we want to make sure all of our parks are getting more resources, that the field houses are updated, that there is enough security, and there continues to be an equity issue of pushing our city to really look at and consider what areas need more attention than others, not because there's a loud voice or a wealthy voice demanding it, but it's actually an area that's been underserved for a long time, and prioritizing those places over others. But Robert, I saw you're trying to jump back in.
No, I just want to say, well, I thank you for at least listening to the concerns. I think that, part of what we need is that we need these things to be part of the conversation, and I mentioned the concerns that we have, and like, I understand what you're trying to do, but unfortunately, when we see the history of what's happened, it seems like these expansions only contribute to the issues that I'm mentioning. And specifically, a number of concerns that we do have is that right now, because of the push to try to redevelop South Chicago specifically, the city has been pushing new park space and other things that we know for sure, I mean, research and other things show that these things do contribute to rising cost of living, right? And, while some of these things are nice, it seems like we already have a lot of park infrastructure, but at the same time that they're investing in these new facilities, the facilities that people are already enjoying and using are seeing disinvestment, right? So it's almost like, we're building all these new parks for people, to want to come and build real estate, but the things that people are already enjoying are seeing lack of investment, and it's making it harder for people to actually enjoy the spaces that for generations they've been enjoying. And that's, again, that comes to part of my concern. But again, I just want to, start engaging you on these conversations, because one of the things that we would like to see is we would like to see before a lot of these developments come into our area, we would like to make sure that there are protections in place. I don't think anybody is totally opposed to, adding new spaces and making things nice, but without the protections already existing and in place, they only present additional burdens to people. And for at least, again, since the McCaffrey proposal came out and people were starting to push those developments, they haven't really helped people. All we've seen is more people moving out. We haven't seen the jobs and resources. And in fact, they're shutting down, proposals for, and again, I'm not totally in support of dirty industry or anything like that. But the fact is that a lot of our people right now are moving to Northwest Indiana. They're moving to the surrounding suburbs to be closer to industry, an industry that is far more polluted because they don't have the protections that we have in place right here in the city of Chicago. So again, I don't want to take up everybody's time, but I definitely appreciate you all taking the time and at least listening to my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And I do think this is a good conversation for other folks to respond to. And I see Amalia has their hand raised to say something.
I just wanted to point out really quickly that this spot is currently a contaminated area, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and is going to be putting forth a proposal to expand up the toxic amount of dredgings, like to keep this site in existence as a toxic landfill. So I think the other thing to consider with this is that, proposing a park is something, to make sure that we're not getting more toxic development in the area too. So that is the other consideration, in addition to what Robert brought up, is that if this isn't a park or something else that is beneficial to the community, then, the proposal that's currently on the table by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is to keep dredging and putting all the toxic dredgings on this site. So I just wanted to give that context to folks that this is pushing back on that idea.
Thank you. And I think we also want to be clear, this isn't a real estate development, right? This isn't like other development proposals. It is a park to be used. And so just wanting to name that, right? The examples we saw are for that public space to be used by our communities. I also want to maybe move us. This is a perfect segue, because we were going to do a Jamboard activity to try to help even get us. We want to keep talking about these proposals, but also get our minds generating on even bigger pieces of like, what could this park really be, and help the students to hear the ideas and the inspiration of community. And so I'm going to ask that we're going to put a link to a Jamboard in the chat. And also we're going to share our screen real quick so that you can all be on the Jamboard together. If you've never used a Jamboard, we'll do a very quick explanation, but also you can feel free to write in the chat or unmute yourself. And we have someone who's going to be writing the notes onto the Jamboard. But if you're also familiar with it, this is a great way if you want to start writing things up. So we're starting with, as you can all see the screen in front of you. This is our first board. We have a couple different questions for tonight. And the first one we're going to start with is, what resources or amenities are needed in the community that are close to this site, right by the CDF? What do you wish were present in your community? So this is bigger than just the park, but what resources and amenities do you think are needed? And Michaela, could you open a Post-it note for us? Show us how to do that. So if you go over to the left side of your screen, you see a little hand and you click on that. You can create a sticky note to write your ideas on, and they all populate in real time if you're able to use that link. But also Michaela is going to be doing that on here. So if folks want to write in the chat or unmute themselves to share what resources and amenities do you think are most important right now for the community? And maybe as folks are thinking, maybe I know, and some of us might be trying to write things on the, oh, I see we just got clean green spaces, jobs. But feel free. If folks want a minute to think about it, I also know we have a little bit of music. We can give everybody, you know, a minute or so to think about it. Maybe I'll also, well, let's stay to just one question. And I see folks are starting to write things up. So Michaela, if you could turn our music on as we have some thinking music. Michaela, I don't know if you can hear yet. I was going to say maybe we can pause our music. So I know we've all had some time to think. And for folks that a Jamboard might not be your preferred way of communicating, I'd love to invite you to unmute or write in the chat so we can help write up your ideas. But I see we've got a lot of great stuff.
Hi, my name is Marie Collins Wright. If I could have a quick moment, I would just like to say that our side of the city and all of the beautiful things that we have been greatly misused, in my opinion, and very short-sighted in my view, just because industry has happened historically doesn't mean that we have to be tied to that going forward in the future. Of course, land has value. It has value everywhere, but particularly in an urban area like the city of Chicago, where focus of pretty much the whole entire state. Resources come from the city of Chicago, and going forward, probably in the next 50 years, it's probably going to be even more so. I think that we need to understand that our communities are important, a very integral part of this growth. And in the history, I think that we've been ignored dramatically. We have a lot of industry that every single day people come from all over out of our communities to work at and make a very great earning, a great living that they are able to provide for their families, and they leave nothing behind except for contamination. People might think that they contribute to the community when they come to work every day, but in my opinion, they don't use our stores and our shops and the things that we have in our community. And I think that going forward, hopefully people will start to realize the value and the beauty of our side of the lakefront. And also, hopefully going forward, somebody might also be able to use all of these fabulous ideas by these students on what could be, the possibilities that exist, and not be afraid of the value of our real estate. We are fortunate, some of us, that we still have real estate in the city of Chicago. And that's why we need to go out and vote for the people that represent our community to make sure that they don't price us out. But not having development is a backwards way of thinking, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Marie, for jumping in. And I think, I know folks continue to write in ideas, and we're getting close to our end time. So we're gonna, you can keep writing ideas up. I'm gonna read some of them off, and I'm gonna move us on. We have a couple other questions that the students brought, kind of building off this, right? What do we need? And, to think about how might these amenities become part of a park? How could they creatively be impacted? And I'm seeing here closing the CDF, clean green spaces, fixing the Calumet Park beach and walkway, Pullman style green industry, low income housing, affordable living, fresh food and services, security, public safety, blue collar jobs, trees, flowers, lakeshore habitat, education programs, better public transportation, environmental remediation. So lots of things around the environment, but also, basketball courts and new park amenities. So I encourage folks in the chat or in this page to keep brainstorming. I know one of the questions, if you'll go to the third page, Michaela, for our shared screen, the third page, yep, is that one, we looked at these different proposals from our students, and we'll try to take about 5 minutes on this question. Of what intensity of human activity do you think would be appropriate if we go back to the park aspect? So we've thought about some of our needs, some of the ways we might want to engage, what we need in our community. What level of human intensity do you think might be appropriate for this kind of site? We saw from low human engagement to high to moderate in the different examples that Daniel and Amanda presented for us.
Hi, it's Ron. I think this is one of the critical questions for many of the parks in not only in Chicago, but everywhere. We have a contaminated landfill of dredge material. There might be value, for instance, in growing food, but this is a difficult place to imagine growing food. It might be a place where we could add a few more baseball fields, some more athletic facilities, but it's a really strange shape, this triangle that doesn't fit athletic fields very comfortably. It's also a little remote, as we've seen. So I think what we've tried to understand is if we would like to have a high intensity use, we kind of need to build something that would draw people there. I mean, we kind of laughed and said, you know, what if you put a Ferris wheel? That people would want to, you'd make that kind of spectacle or a destination that would bring everybody, you know, to this site. It seems a little strange, but we could be misreading it. So I think for us, this is a really critical question because you saw Amanda propose a bog. Because we think there's, it's not readily evident what would be the best thing for people to do here. So we would love to hear thoughts on that kind of sliding scale of how much human activity and how much non-human activity might be the right mix of things for the site.
And I'm seeing we got at least one response on our Jamboard of low intensity and concern about a concert venue, which has been proposed at other times. But what about others? I'm also seeing someone else said low intensity in the chat. And to scroll to the right, if you look at the top of the Jamboard, there's this little square in the top of your screen, and there are some arrows, which will allow you, but also you can write your ideas in the chat here or unmute, and we can help to discuss together. And Michaela, could you show everybody how to scroll between the two options? And we're using slide 3.
Could you repeat that?
Michaela, could you just show us how to move between the Jamboard pages, since we're all watching your screen? So Michaela's showing us there's some arrows at the top, and the question that Ron was looking for feedback for is on the third screen. And I know some folks Jamboard isn't working, but please feel free to unmute or write in the chat. What are your thoughts about how intense of a space this should be? How much activity?
I think we would also be interested to hear from people who use Calumet Park. And, you know, in some ways, this is the next expansion of Calumet Park. What is successful there? What might enhance its ability to serve the community? Knowing for sure, having been there a few times, a little bit of investment would certainly help. And then I'd also come back to our earliest slide, which is I'd love to hear ideas for how we can stop calling this the CDF site and actually start calling it the name of a park. You know, do we just call it Calumet Park North, or is there another way to think about what the name of the park itself might actually help us envision, commemorate, articulate some visions and ideas.
And I'm seeing some name suggestions of Calumet Shore or Renewal. I'm also seeing some different questions about, or different comments about the level of use. I'm seeing mix between reclamation, nature, and activities for children, families, and seniors. I'm seeing more programming on the grounds outside of the field house. Some who want low intensity so that you could come and park there, and there's a more private area than Calumet Park. I'm seeing more programming. Maybe I should ask folks what kind of what does that mean for more programming? Do you have a vision of what that would mean, or what would attract children and families or seniors? I'm seeing some of the programming could be like North Park Nature Center, making this maybe a medium to low intensity to be an oasis. I see the question, is there any possibility that the area to the west could be available for parkland? And I think we're imagining closing the CDF park. It is also possible to imagine that we could get some of that land from the Port District and continue to expand. Nothing is outside of the possibility. I think it takes the political energy. I'm seeing love native plants. I like the circles, likes the idea of walking labyrinths. But growing food is mentioned, or farmers markets. How might there be ways for food to be present even if you can't grow it?
So it's Ron, just to expand that, there's, there are parts of the world where this kind of grows out of the comment on Pullman's green industries, talking about food, but also knowing that we're on a contaminated site. There are greenhouses and glass houses and other ways of growing food and using technology more than using the great prairie soils of Illinois, which seems absurd given that we've got some of the greatest soils in the world. Maybe that's a kind of way where there could be some advantage to having access to shipping. The size of the site, though, I think may be a limitation to the capacity that one could grow food in a kind of industrial setting or greenhouse. I'm just kind of thinking out loud. Gotham Greens, exactly.
And there's a note in the chat from Juanita that I think is really worth repeating, that the funding sources for remediating this park will likely be different than day-to-day operations or other previous capital investment programs.
And importantly, that it will likely take 10 to 20 years for Calumet Park for the CDF site to become a park once it's closed and capped. So we're talking about a longer term vision for this park, which does not preclude working actively on improvements at the existing Calumet Park at the same time. So I just put that out there so that folks don't necessarily think about these as competing things, because the timeframes and the funding pots are quite different. So just want to minimize the limitations to just thinking wildly. so that we can just come up with cool ideas that then can be worked through further.
I want to do a time check for us because I see that we're at 7:26, and I especially want to check in with Ron and our students to see what is most helpful for you before we jump to our announcements.
Hi, it's Ron. I mean, this is all really helpful, and for us, this is I think we're rekindling the conversation, and it's all really valuable. And I think it'll take a little bit of time to kind of digest the comments. I think what we're going to do is Amanda and Daniel have about 4 more weeks in the studio. And I know we're trying to schedule a time for another presentation. I would just say keep contact with us, continue to give us input, criticisms, insights, send dances that you like or you don't like. As we continue to work with Rachel and everyone else, this is a class, so we have a particular time to incorporate the energy from this and the ideas from this, but IT and our term isn't going anywhere. So we're committed to start this process for us and keep going. So we just would encourage everybody to keep contributing ideas, and let's continue to build the energy around a really difficult piece of land. It's a real challenge. But Rachel, I'm available to hang in here for a little bit longer.
I was going to say, I'm sure that folks would still be willing to talk. For those that might need to leave, Michaela, would you be willing to share our slides with announcements? And then we can keep this room open for folks to keep dialoguing or Jamboarding after. The slide before, Michaela, please. So I just want to let you all know this is part of our Netsch Lecture redesign series we're doing this summer. I'd love to have you come back on Wednesday, July 20th at the same time, 6 p.m. to see the final projects from our students, how they've incorporated your input, the changes they've made. The registration link is on this slide. We'll also drop it into the chat for you. And then also you can save the date. We're going to have a lecture on depaving. What does that mean? How do we depave Chicago and other areas on August 9th over the lunch hour? And we're also looking at presentations around the natural river's edge and a live tour of rock drawings along the lake. Next slide. Coming up in just the next couple of weeks, next slide, Michaela, is going to be on July 9th, next week. We'd love for you to come walk in this area of the city with us. For those that don't live there and those who are neighbors, we want to have a big kickoff event to start a walking club at Schaefer Park. We'll be walking from Schaefer to Steelworkers and starting off at the Urban Grower Collective's South Chicago Farm Stand. If you'd like to register, the link is here and the email. Similarly, on July 16th is the 20th anniversary celebration of the South Shore Nature Center from 1 to 4 p.m. Love for you to come out and do that. And I want to give a moment if we have some other announcements. I think we have an announcement from ASE this evening.
Hello, this is Amalia Nieto Gomez from the Alliance of the Southeast. I was just going to say that our organization is working on fighting the extension for the CDF. In other words, building it so it's even taller and creating basically a toxic hill right next to our drinking water. So If you're interested in that, or you want to carry on conversations about, the CDF or any of these things that we talked about tonight, please feel free to contact me or Sam. Sam, if you can put your contact info in the chat, that'd be great. But like I said, we do want to encourage folks, there is more going on at the CDF that will affect all of us. So if you're interested in the CDF or any other local developments, please reach out to us and we can keep you updated and see what you like to do to get involved.
I see Sam put his email in the chat, and Juanita has dropped the info email and my email in the chat as well. And Michaela, could you go to the next slide? Just for folks to see it, here's our phone number and the emails of the policy team. And Sam has also dropped a phone number to reach him. So again, we want to keep the conversation going. And if folks want to stay on here and keep talking or Jamboarding, we're welcome to do that for a little bit as well. Yeah, so we can turn this screen off and allow folks that want to stay to keep talking. And thank you so much for everyone that came out this evening. Well, those who are still on, love any other comments or feedback you have about the presentations you saw this evening in our discussion about what the community needs and also how to develop this park. Paul, please.
I was very impressed by the new concepts, the nature uses, the bogs, the plantings. I congratulate them. The only comment I had would be about connection to Steelworkers Park. I see this as the missing piece in a linear connection north and south. And though it's probably very expensive, et cetera, but at some point, the talk of a bridge over the river that people could walk over or bicycle over, they would connect them to the whole integrated system from north to south. The bicycle paths that come into the area currently have to go around other bridges. That is a big idea, but in the initial planning, that looking forward to someday having an ability to go across the river and connect with the rest of the 26 miles that are there would be my only other suggestion.
So I got a quick question for you. I'm sorry, not related to what you just said.
No, please go ahead.
Do you know how we could, or who we have to talk to advocate for those resources for the existing Calumet Park, like for the infrastructure and the other things that we need?
Yeah, I don't know if you have a relationship, Robert, with the park supervisor as sort of a first point of contact, but also, I mean, at the park district, happy to work with you and with the PAC and Calumet Park to continue to advocate for more investments here at Friends of the Parks.
Awesome, that would be awesome. I definitely want to reach out to you and talk some more about this, because we definitely need, like I said, it seems like, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but it definitely does seem like there is disinvestment in the existing park that people actually use a lot. And, we definitely have concerns about that. We want to make sure that, specifically that people are able to enjoy what they've been enjoying for generations and stuff. But thank you all. I appreciate your time and I appreciate the presentation and your openness and willingness to talk to us. So again, thank you so much. I'm actually going to sign off, but thank you.
Hi, it's Ron. Paul, does it know if anyone's ever tried to imagine how to use the railroad bridge as a possible potential as well? Many cities have these. Chicago has an amazing collection of bridges. But we don't really get They really haven't been catalysts for a 21st century kind of connection. Has there been any discussion about, other scenarios than building another bridge across the Calumet? Or
Oh,
Looks like he dropped.
looks like, but it seems like he was asking if we've heard of other scenarios about other trains or other ways that other tracks we might use to get across that river.
I can offer a comment. I haven't heard of any serious discussion of that other than our own musings. But given the number of bridges we have and designs and styles, first of all, it'd have to be quite tall because the boats still have to go through. I've often thought of the kind of bridge that swivels. When a boat has to come through, the bridge swivels and allows a boat to pass if the opening is wide enough. But it's there, it's open most of the time until a boat has to go through. That's all. That's the only contribution I can think of.
it would be a pretty remarkable experience to be at the top of the bridge, given how tall it would have to be. The Skyway is kind of thrilling to be up that high. It's also a little disconcerting. Let alone some routine repairs would be helpful there too.
Arnold, the floor is yours.
Yes, I've been thinking the same thing as Paul, dreaming at night, looking out of my window because I can see all of this stuff going on a regular basis. We have one bridge that's there. I don't know if it can be retrofitted. We've had a lot of problems with that bridge mechanically in the past, but there is some federal money available to bridge divides. It just was announced. And so I don't know if there would be enough money in the package to do a new bridge, but possibly somebody can start thinking about maybe retrofitting the existing bridge to accommodate bicycles that are coming off that trail. And believe me, a lot of people are using that trail and crossing that river. So it may be justified. That's my best comment, but I really appreciate Paul saying something because I wasn't going to say a word. I was because I thought it was just me. But apparently, and by the way, we have a park that's going to be going in, hopefully, at that corner right there at the bridge. There are a lot of new development proposals that are occurring right there. So now is the time to start, throwing out these good ideas.
Is that the park that Neighbor Space has been working on that you're referring to?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes. They're looking for a way to get people down to the river, to use the river and so on and so on. I'm thinking, wow, this is a natural connection. As long as you guys work with me on getting rid of that CDF, I'm sorry, that confined disposal facility is a little over a mile from my house. And whatever comes off of there hits the air and I'm going to be breathing it. So it is a very personal thing. We need to encapsulate it. We need to put trees in it. We need to do something with that as soon as possible. So hopefully we can start moving in that direction.
Thank you for that. And we were promised it. I know governments and cities, they break promises, but I'm never happy about it. So we got to keep fighting for what was promised and what's best for our community, right? Not a toxic dump. Any other comments? I know folks stayed on, maybe wanting to share something. We want to honor whatever your thoughts are.
Rachel, can you remind us one more time? The students are going to finish up their project and then we're going to see results of that in another presentation.
Yes, so July 20th, same time, 6 p.m. The students will be offering a kind of a recap, okay, we took these ideas from tonight. This is where we're going next. And I'll drop it in the chat again. We have the link live if you'd like to register for that, before you even leave here. I'm having trouble copying it. It's the Zoom. But I know Julie dropped it in the chat. It's an Eventbrite Netsch Lecture redesign. So we'd love for you to join us again it's July 20th. It's a Wednesday, 6 p.m. And we'll send that out after this meeting as well to your email box. And
can I ask, I know that we did this last year regarding DeSable Park, as was mentioned, and there were actual models built and other stuff. Like what can we expect to see?
So I think we're going to kind of learning from this process. I think this site has and kind of demands that we look at some scenarios for connectivity. So I think there will be some diagrams, particularly about how the continuity between Steelworkers Park, CDF, and the Calumet Park. See, I called it CDF again. I've got to stop doing that. The park and Calumet Park. So I think part of what we will do are just building some diagrammatic scenarios. We're being very careful not to propose a design. So I think we'll continue to have multiple ideas so that, we don't want to, I think the kind of time and the complexity demands that we not be definitive about what that is. I think we just want to show scenarios with the ability to help make the case that we cannot allow this to continue to be a CDF, to build energy, commitment, enthusiasm from the community and from larger forces in Chicago and the US government to not do this, to not do what they threatened to do. I think we're going to figure out, Juanita, what the best way to do this, if it's drawings, or we might do a model as well. I'll have to have a conversation with Amanda and Daniel on that.
Yeah. I was just curious, and I know that we were so wowed by that presentation that we want to make sure everybody knows really cool stuff is still yet to come. So
yes.
And I think it's really cool to see the ideas from tonight be incorporated. Like, I think that's going to make it really exciting too. So thank you, Amanda and Daniel and Ron for helping make that come alive. And we'll be really excited to see if it's models or designs, but just newness.
Can I just ask one question that I had that I didn't put in the chat? Knowing what we've heard from the Park District about the challenges with lakeshore erosion, and even an idea that they had to put a boat launch at Steelworkers Park, which got delayed by COVID, so it didn't happen. But then they realized when they were seeing the amount of lakeshore erosion that was happening, that the engineering that they had done for that boat launch would have destroyed the boat. The lakeshore erosion would have destroyed the boat launch because they had not fully grasped how bad the erosion challenges are. So I'm just looking at your boardwalks, and overlooks, and going, oh my gosh, is that gonna get washed away? What, you guys are the experts in these things, right? But just tell us how you're making sure that this is really not gonna wash away, so.
Yeah, we'll work on that. Yeah. They're not hanging from the clouds, that's for sure.
Yeah, cool.
really difficult because the lake is so alluring to be at the edge. I mean, I think that's what makes it such an incredible asset for Chicago. But it's a nefarious character ultimately. You know, the lake has its own voice. I think when we work to kind of bulwark against that voice, it's difficult. It's really difficult. And we love its wild voice. And so trying to find that balance between the living waters of Lake Michigan and our kind of human compulsion to make it safe and easy for us to get to that edge. That's a 26-mile-long problem in Chicago.
Yep. Yep. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
thank-
everyone.
Thank you for that. Thanks to everybody. Thank you again, Ron and Daniel and Amanda, especially for a great presentation and all your brain power that's gone into tonight. So we're really, really appreciative. I mean, look, you have folks want to just keep staying and talking to you forever. So it's because it's so engaging. So thank you. And thank you everyone that came out tonight. It really wouldn't have happened without us all being able to talk together. So thank you again for the great participation. Bye.
Good night.